Well, it might surprise you to learn that 90% of teenage girls play video games, and I say surprised because of the persistent notion that gaming is somehow a guy thing. It's a notion perpetuated, though, by the games themselves. They're full of female characters that might perhaps appeal to the tastes of white, heterosexual young men. And then there's the misogynistic harassment that female gamers come up against on a daily basis. Well, a new documentary takes a hard look at what is behind that harassment. It's called GTFO, or Get the F Out, and it's screening this weekend as part of the Doxa Film Festival. Shannon Sun-Higginson directed the film, and she's in town for the festival, and she's been kind enough to stop by our studio. Hello, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You came at this film back in 2012. You weren't a gamer. You were an outsider. From your point of view, what did the gaming world look like then?
So at that point, I guess I hadn't really thought about the culture of games too much. And a friend of mine sent me a video which sort of bookends the film involving a woman getting sexually harassed during an online fighting game tournament.
Right.
And so I was completely shocked when I first saw that, just because I wasn't particularly familiar with the culture. I'd played games a little bit as a kid, but certainly was not aware that this was happening at this level.
And this was a young woman who she was getting harassed by her coach.
That's right, yeah. That's one of the strangest parts, because you would think that he would want her to play as well as possible.
And for people who are unfamiliar with the kind of gaming we're talking about here, in the world of multiplayer games, these are people who are playing with people they can't see all over the world. They're wearing a headset. They can hear each other's voices. That's what we're talking about here for the purposes of definition. Is that right?
I mean, for the most part, that's true. But what we try to cover in the movie is a lot of different people's experiences. And
Right.
That example that I gave involves people in close physical proximity to each other. I mean, that's part of why it's such a striking video, because he is going up to her and smelling her, asking her inappropriate questions about her body. I do think that anonymity has a big part to play in this, but a lot of women that I spoke with feel those experiences when they go to physical tournaments, or even if they're just playing with friends in person in the workplace. So it's not strictly online.
You tell story after story about women being harassed in the gaming world. How did all of that affect you over time?
Well, at the beginning, like I said, I was really shocked. I think like many people would be. Unfortunately, over time, I've become kind of desensitized to it, because once you look at a certain number of messages, it's just you can't react emotionally every time. Otherwise, I would just have a breakdown every day. But I've just sort of come to approach it as like, okay, this is a problem, and what are things that we can do to help solve it?
Did you get angry, though, after going through all of the footage? Because the tone that I got out of the film was almost, I mean, it's very measured. It's almost academic.
Well, thank you for saying that. I think part of it is because I'm approaching this as an outsider. So obviously, I completely empathize with the women in this movie, the targets of this harassment. But I did want to approach it in a way that makes people think about it, not just as an emotional reaction, but also
Right.
what is happening and culturally what is going on, like with this particular group of people, and how does this affect the rest of the world, and how does this affect the future of games? Part of the targeted audience for me is people in games who do want to make a difference. So I tried to portray everything as fairly as possible.
The film was finished before Gamergate, and that was, of course, when anonymous players threatened to rape and murder female game developers, a couple of whom are actually featured in the doc. You did a postscript to address that, and it didn't feel out of place. I mean, looking back on it, was Gamergate, was that something you could have anticipated?
The thing about Gamergate for me, and I can't speak for everyone in the movie, but I think a lot of the women that I spoke with and sort of caught up with after that, they sort of view it as one in a series of events, not a particularly odd or out-of-place event. It's just the one that got the most media coverage. But the point that we tried to get across with the postscript is that, this is just going to continue to happen and continue to escalate if we don't do anything about it.
And what can we do about it?
It's really great. Like in the screenings that I've done, I've had a lot of people come up to me afterwards asking me what they can do to help. It really depends on what level you're at.
Right.
I mean, just sharing these stories is important, sharing this media, standing up for people online. If you have any power of influence actually within the industry, obviously those are really important steps to take. trying to, foster an environment where women feel comfortable playing games, because a lot of the times just the fact that you are the only person that looks like you in the room can make you uncomfortable.
But you talk in the film about that cycle, about the games are made, by straight white men in their 20s or 30s, for straight white men in their 20s and 30s. They grow up playing these games, and then they go off to make these games for straight white men in their 20s and 30s.
Yeah. Well, it's complicated. And the thing is, the issue isn't even necessarily just about women. It's all about all sorts of other groups, the LGBTQ community, people of color, people of different abilities. And so I think of GTFO as just the very, very beginning of a conversation about diversity in games. I guess it's not necessarily the start of it, but I do want this message to get across to people who aren't within the games industry, and sort of get people talking about what it means to be a gamer and how we can make it more inclusive.
Can you understand at all the kinds of people who send those vile and hateful messages to women gamers online? Do you get it?
I think we try to cover a little bit of sort of what that motivation can be. There are a few factors. If you watch the movie, we talk about how that sort of nerd, quote unquote, nerd culture is becoming so much more mainstream now with, like superhero movies and Harry Potter, all sorts of things that, people may have thought of as niche, but now have become part of popular culture. I think that's part of the reason, just having something that you love, that you think is yours, sort of open up to a bigger world. I think that might be part of it. Like I said, the anonymity obviously factors into it. And then the cycle of, they're marketed towards boys, therefore it's more boys, therefore boys feel like they own the games, therefore they become the creators of more games. So I do try to think about what it is that causes people to act this way, but it's a little hard to get into that mindset, I guess.
Shannon, it's great to talk with you this afternoon. Thanks so much for taking the time with us.
Thanks for having me.